The cold mud ruined the only thing that mattered. Madame Victoria's diamond rings flashed under the dim alley light as her hand clamped down on the delicate embroidered silk pad. She didn't just drop it. She tore it right down the middle with a sharp, ugly sound. Then, she kicked the basket of hand-dyed natural linen spools straight into the filthy gutter. The freezing rain of the storm immediately washed away 3 months of agonizing work. Victoria laughed, looking down at Mary's uneven, limping stance with pure disgust. What the arrogant woman didn't realize was that the ancient royal violin she held so proudly, the one with the cracked bridge, would remain completely silent forever without those exact strings. Strings that could only be brought to life by the calloused hands of this crippled girl living in a freezing attic. Hit the subscribe button right now to witness how destiny plays its most beautiful, heartwarming melody when you least expect it. Mary didn't yell. She couldn't afford to. She just knelt in the mud, her right leg trembling from the old nerve damage. Years ago, a house fire had almost claimed a neighbor's life. Mary went in when no one else would. She saved a life, but the falling beams left her with a slight hunch and a permanent limp. People called her a hero for about a week. Then they just called her the broken girl. But Mary didn't care about their pity. She carefully scooped up the ruined linen from the puddle, her fingers numb from the cold. She dragged her bad leg up the 5 flights of stairs to her tiny attic workspace. The room smelled of boiling tree bark, beeswax, and damp wood. This was where she performed miracles. She was the last artisan in the city who knew the ancient technique of weaving and treating natural linen violin strings. It was a forgotten art, but she worked day and night, her back aching, her fingers bleeding, for one single reason. Her father. He was a heavy laborer at the limestone quarry on the edge of town. The constant explosions and dust had taken his sight and destroyed his hearing. He lived in a world of absolute, terrifying silence. The doctors said a highly specialized cochlear implant and reconstructive surgery could restore his hearing. The cost was astronomical. $2 million. Every spool of thread Mary sold, every antique instrument she restored, was a fraction of a penny toward that impossible goal. She sat at her workbench, wiping the mud off her tools. Tomorrow was payday at the Grand Exhibition Hall. She just needed to hold on until then. The exhibition hall was blindingly bright, filled with people wearing clothes that cost more than Mary's entire life. She stood in the back office, leaning heavily on her good leg. Mr. Sterling, the gallery manager, didn't even look up from his phone. He tossed a single $20 bill onto the desk. Mary stared at it, her heart sinking into her stomach. She asked him where the rest of her monthly wages were. Sterling laughed, a dry, cruel sound. He walked around the desk and looked her up and down. He told her she was lucky to even be allowed in a place this nice with a posture like a gargoyle. He said her recent batch of strings wasn't up to standard, so he was docking her pay. It was a blatant lie. He was pocketing the money to fund his own gambling debts. Mary tried to speak up, her voice shaking with desperate anger. She told him about her father, about the surgery, about the fact that she hadn't eaten a hot meal in days just to finish the royal commission. Sterling stepped closer, invading her space. He told her that if she made a scene, he would tell the entire music industry that she was a fraud, and she would never sell a single string again. He shoved her shoulder. Mary stumbled backward, her weak leg giving out, and she fell hard against the marble floor. A few wealthy patrons walking by stopped. They didn't help her up. They just whispered behind their champagne glasses, amused by the pathetic sight. Mary bit her lip until it bled, forcing the tears back down. If you believe that a resilient spirit will eventually find its rightful melody, please type this prayer in the comments. I pray the Lord illuminates my path with kindness, guiding me to weave the most complete and sweetest song of happiness. The storm outside grew violent by nightfall. The wind howled through the cracks in Mary's attic window. Down in the alley, a man in a soaking wet delivery jacket pulled a small girl out of the freezing rain. His name was Eric. To the world, he was a phantom. He was the billionaire owner of the largest hearing technology conglomerate on the continent and the sole inheritor of the French Royal Music Archives. But tonight, he was just a desperate father. His daughter Lily hadn't spoken a single word in 2 years. Severe trauma from losing her mother in a car accident had locked her in a silent, unreachable world. Therapists, doctors, and specialists had all failed. Eric had taken to walking the city streets with her in disguise, hoping the raw, Unfiltered sounds of the real world might break through her mental walls. The sudden thunderclap terrified Lily. She covered her ears, hyperventilating, her small body shaking uncontrollably under the awning. Eric held her, feeling completely helpless. Then, a sound drifted down from the attic above. It wasn't a complex symphony. It was just a few simple, resonant notes played on an old oak wood violin, but the tone was incredibly warm. It had a natural, earthy frequency that seemed to cut right through the chaos of the storm. Lily stopped shaking. She slowly lowered her hands. She looked up toward the faint yellow light of the attic window. For the first time in 2 years, a tear rolled down her cheek, and the corners of her mouth lifted into a tiny, fragile smile. She let out a soft, breathy sigh. Eric froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He picked her up and quickly navigated the dark stairwell, following the music. He found the door slightly ajar. Inside, Mary was sitting on a stool, her eyes closed, playing the instrument. She looked exhausted, bruised, and broken. But the music flowing from her hands was pure salvation. Eric didn't announce his real identity. He knocked softly and asked if they could step in from the cold. Mary didn't judge his worn-out delivery jacket. She immediately put down the violin, limped over to the stove, and poured them 2 cups of hot water. She gave Lily her only dry blanket. Eric watched silently as this disabled, struggling girl offered them the last bit of warmth she had. While Mary was distracted trying to fix the leaking window, Eric noticed the documents scattered on her table. They were the original sketches and certification papers for the Royal Violin restoration. He recognized the project immediately. It was a $1 million bounty his own foundation had put out. But the name on the official submission form wasn't Mary's. It was Victoria's. Eric quietly pulled out his phone. He activated the hidden infrared scanner app, a piece of tech his company developed. He scanned Mary's original silk embroidery patterns. He saw the embedded C2PA digital watermark. He knew exactly what was happening. The gallery manager and the arrogant artist were stealing her life's work. Mary's simple, oakwood melody managed to warm a little girl's frozen heart. If you feel that warmth, please rewrite the prayer in the comments. I pray the Lord illuminates my path with kindness, guiding me to weave the most complete and sweetest song of happiness. The following evening, the Royal Exhibition Hall was a sea of velvet and diamonds. Flashbulbs popped frantically as Victoria posed on the red carpet, proudly holding the restored antique violin for the press. Sterling stood right beside her, his chest puffed out in a tailored tuxedo, already calculating his cut of the $1 million prize. Inside the grand ballroom, the head of the cultural committee tapped his crystal glass to quiet the room. He announced that they were gathered tonight to honor a truly historic achievement in musical preservation. He called Victoria to the stage to accept the Foundation's highest grant for single-handedly restoring the lost art of natural linen acoustic strings. Victoria smiled modestly, soaking in the thunderous applause from the city's wealthiest patrons. She stepped up to the microphone, preparing a long, fake speech about her tireless dedication to the grueling craft. She didn't even get to say her first word. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the hall didn't just open. They were pushed wide open with a deafening thud that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The live string quartet stopped playing instantly. Everyone turned around in shock. Standing in the doorway was the delivery driver from the alley. But he wasn't wearing a soaking, wet, cheap jacket anymore. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, and he was flanked by 4 massive private security contractors and 2 uniformed federal police officers. Sterling's face turned pale for a second, but he quickly recovered his arrogant composure. He marched down the center aisle, loudly demanding that security remove this vagrant from an exclusive, invite-only event. Eric didn't even look at him. He just kept walking forward, the crowd of elites parting like the Red Sea before his absolute, terrifying authority. When he reached the front row, the head of the cultural committee nearly dropped his champagne glass. He rushed forward, bowing slightly, stammering and calling him Mr. Eric, asking why the elusive owner of the foundation had decided to visit unannounced. A collective gasp echoed through the massive room. Victoria froze completely, her perfectly manicured hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped the violin. Eric calmly stepped up and took the microphone directly from the podium. He looked out at the sea of wealthy elites, his voice cold, steady, and echoing with power. He stated clearly that his foundation was built to protect precious heritage, not to fund pathetic thieves. He gestured to one of his men, who immediately plugged a secure tablet into the main projector system. A massive, high-definition infrared scan of the silk embroidery pad on Victoria's violin appeared on the screen behind them. Eric explained to the silent room that the Royal Archives had recently patented a microscopic digital watermark, the C2PA protocol, woven directly into the thread structure of all commissioned pieces. He zoomed in on the image until a clear, undeniable digital signature glowed brightly right in the center of the fabric. It didn't say Victoria. It said Mary. Sterling started sweating profusely, frantically backing away toward the side exit. But two armed officers were already standing there, blocking the door with their arms crossed. Eric wasn't finished destroying them. He pulled up a second piece of undeniable evidence. It was the security footage from the gallery's own back office, showing Sterling violently shoving a crippled girl to the marble floor and maliciously withholding her hard-earned wages. The wealthy patrons who had laughed at Mary just yesterday suddenly looked away in deep shame, the room so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Eric turned to Victoria, his eyes burning with a quiet, lethal fury. He told her that tearing a master artisan's work in the freezing mud didn't make her a genius. It just made her a common, pathetic criminal. The police stepped forward, forcefully pulling Victoria's arms behind her back and snapping cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists right there on the stage. Sterling tried to make a run for it, but he barely made it 3 steps before he was tackled hard to the floor by the security team. Eric announced to the entire room that their gallery accounts were frozen indefinitely pending a massive federal fraud investigation. As the police dragged the screaming, deeply humiliated fraudsters out the back doors in front of the flashing cameras, the front doors opened again. Mary stood there, looking terrified and incredibly confused, holding little Lily's hand. Eric had sent his private, armored car to bring her safely here. He walked down the steps of the stage, approached Mary, and did something that shocked every single elite in the room. The powerful billionaire knelt down on one knee right in front of her. He didn't do it to propose marriage, but to look the disabled artisan directly in the eyes with absolute, unwavering respect. He told her that her beautiful music had saved his daughter's life in the darkest storm. He stood up and announced that as of this exact moment, Mary was the new executive director of the Royal Music Museum, with full creative control and a massive salary. And more importantly, he reached into his jacket and handed her a sealed envelope. It contained the paperwork for a fully funded, $2 million surgical trust established exclusively for her father. Mary dropped her wooden cane, covering her mouth as she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably into Eric's shoulder. Lily wrapped her small arms tightly around Mary's neck, finally breaking her traumatic silence, speaking her very first words in 2 years. She softly, beautifully whispered, "Thank you. If the victory of a kind heart brought tears to your eyes, please comment the prayer. I pray the Lord illuminates my path with kindness, guiding me to weave the most complete and sweetest song of happiness." 3 months later, the air in the grand concert hall was absolutely electric. Sterling and Victoria were sitting in a cold, concrete federal cell, facing 10 years for grand larceny and the malicious destruction of cultural heritage. Their careers were completely annihilated, their names permanently erased from the industry. But high up in the VIP balcony of the hall, a frail old man with fresh surgical scars behind his ears sat nervously in a plush velvet chair. Down on the brilliantly lit stage, Mary stood confidently, wearing a beautiful, flowing gown that perfectly hid her slight hunch. She gently raised the ancient oak violin to her chin. She drew the bow across the perfectly woven, natural linen strings. A warm, incredibly rich, and emotional melody filled the massive auditorium. Up in the balcony, the old man gasped, tears streaming down his deeply weathered face. He turned to Eric, who was sitting right next to him, holding Lily's hand with a warm smile. The old man wept freely, saying that he could finally, truly hear his little girl's voice again. When the world maliciously tries to strip away your sound, God will always compensate you with the most magnificent, brilliant melody of destiny. Subscribe to the channel right now to plant a seed of blessing and witness more miracles every single day.